So I was born in Chicago, Illinois, and grew up there. And I've now been in D.C. for 29 years, almost exactly. I moved out here in October of '85. So it's like, wow, did not expect to be here that long. As most people in D.C. coming for jobs, they think about coming for, a couple of years and then going back to wherever they came from. I have remained. And part of it is because I did get into federal government. As you saw from my background, I started in the federal government working at the Department of Justice for the Office of Redress Administration, which was the first part of the Civil Liberties Act of 1988. So Office of Redress Administration basically was in charge of verifying Japanese Americans interned during World War II. They had to have been alive as of October 10th, 1988. That was the criteria. If you were alive at that point, you were eligible to receive the redress monies. So that the first part was finding all of these people. They did that through the camp rosters from the camps, and then matched it to Social Security. So that was sort of the main how they started that process. And then from there, then letters were sent out. They had to sort of prove who they were, proof of address, proof that they were alive, things along those lines. So then those would come back and they would be verified, and then it would go on for payment. Now, how they did the payments, they started with the oldest people and went, so for the oldest down to the youngest was how they did. And, which was sort of, so, so for a Japanese American, it was fascinating to be part of that process, and I was really, really lucky. Bob Bratt was the administrator of that office, and he actually did lots of research out in the community. And I think, the community was very, very lucky to have someone as dedicated as him, because he was like, this is really cool. I mean, he really embraced it, whereas, government, you get the reputation of they're just in for, but in his particular case, he really did care about this issue and was really fascinated by it. Did a lot of research, was on the road a lot, meeting with different community people, trying to, get information and that kind of stuff. He had a good management team as well. And, I think the community tends to forget the steps it takes to get to that point. But I think the community really owes Bob, a lot of gratitude for what he was able to accomplish. And one of your questions was what was one of your highlights? One of the highlights of my government was what they did is when they got ready to issue the first set of checks, they did a signing ceremony so that the Attorney General actually presented the check and the letter of apology to 10 of the oldest recipients, that could travel, so they had, and so it was a whole big ceremony at Department of Justice. It was really, and it just, just sent chills, it's like, they were like, oh, okay, we have to go, they might need some help, go meet them at the door and escort them in. And as, my office mate and I, we were just, as you see them coming in, you're like, oh my God, this is all the work that we've been doing, this is, so it really, that actually was, was probably one of the highlights. It was really, really, just your heart just was like, oh my God, these are, but, so that, was my Office of Redress experience. Now, the other thing that people forget is the second part of the redress bill created a public education fund. And I was fortunate to be able to be part of that as well. I was the deputy director of that organization. So the purpose of the public education fund was to educate the public so that something like this would never happen again. That started not until 1996, towards the end of the bill. And part of it is the board of directors had to get presidential, this was appointments, and it was a whole process of that. But that also, for the 2 years, it was fascinating. We set up a grant program. So it was in, education, the arts, research, and so sent out RFPs out to the community, and I think we funded almost $2 million in grants. And like I said, it was across the U.S., including D.C., on little projects. Some were little projects, some were big research projects. It varied in, but so that was actually fascinating, to be part of that as well. Okay, well now I'm still at the Department of Justice.
Yeah.
I'm still in the Civil Rights Division. I work in the voting section, and so it's really protecting the rights of voters. It's a hard time for us right now. The Supreme Court recently struck down a big provision of our act. So part of it is developing new law.
Okay.
We're in courts now. It's like, okay, how does the law, how will it affect it? As far as my work there, I help with the election monitoring program. So we go out and actually monitor elections and that kind of stuff. But mostly I do administrative reports and things. One of your questions was challenges. And I think one of the challenges is there are so many sub-ethnic groups in the Asian community. And all of our backgrounds are so different. Some of the groups are new immigrants, some have been here for generations. And how do you find a common bond? Because, most Americans look at all of us as Asian, not understanding that the differences, be it language, economically, politically, I think, and to me, I think that's one of the biggest challenges. It is an issue, and part of it, once again, goes to the fact that, some generations have been here for a while and some haven't. And I think it really is incumbent upon the community in general to educate why is it important to vote and to explain what are some of the issues. Okay, I don't know, where are you from? Where did you grow up?
Oh, I'm Korean. I was born in Korea, but I actually grew up in Tennessee.
Oh, in
most of my
Tennessee.
life.
I'm from South Carolina.
And you're from South Carolina. Okay. Well, okay, because the example I was going to use, if one of you was from California, like California, when you get their ballot, there's all these initiatives and things along those lines. How would someone with limited English, how do you explain those kinds, okay, well, you need to, it's hard enough, how do you work the machine?
Yeah.
But, when you get to the initiatives and things along those lines. So it really is, how do you educate the public, or explaining why is it important to vote and getting them registered to vote. I think that's one of the other challenges. I think, in a lot of the countries, that voting is not something that's a natural kind of a thing. Well, a lot of the groups are already doing that. They're going out into the communities, using the churches. In particular, the churches is a good one. Or at, a lot of times they'll do the voter registration drives out at, like, the Vietnamese markets, and the Korean grocery stores, things along those lines. That's all good and effective, but I think you really there has to be more one-to-one talking to people or into small groups to explain, to get them to understand the importance. Right, the importance of voting, the importance of the issues, and the differences between candidates. Regardless of party, even within a party, even in primaries, you've got differences among the candidates. How do you help them come to a good, position to vote?
Recently,
9/11, I think, had one of the biggest impacts in in recent times. Because I think, once again, it focused on the differences and how we look. It was easier to then start to, I think, and then once again, in the Asian community, you have all the sub-ethnic groups, and the differences and the needs of each of the different groups is so different. That even though all Asians get lumped together, your experience growing up and mine are going to be different. You're a newer generation. I'm third generation here. So, I was born and raised in Chicago. My parents were born in California, and I just think, and the opportunities to some extent that I have, newer immigrants aren't going to have, particularly economically. You look at the more recent immigrants, the Vietnamese, the Hmong, it's a whole different situation for them than for the ones that have been here for a while. And I think that's one of the challenges, how, for the groups that have been here longer, how can we help? And 9/11 actually raised that in some ways, right? It was the Japanese American Citizens League that was the first group to step out and say, no, you cannot be doing these things to the Sikhs, the Muslims, you know. Because at one point they actually did talk about, oh, we should round them up and put them in camps. And, you know, and it was like, okay, we've already done that once in history. Let's not repeat this, and here's how and why, you know. And I think, you know, JCL in particular was one of the groups that came out very strongly against not scapegoating people.
Public policy decisions.
Well, hopefully, you know, the biggest public policy decision will be that you can't just round up people because of how they look. Mm-hmm. Or you can't just, you know, I mean, and I think that's probably the biggest lesson. That, you know, hopefully, I mean, it will still, hopefully it won't be relevant 100 years from now, right? But if it is, I think that would be the big lesson. Is don't, you know, you can't single out a group of people.
Yeah.
Or you shouldn't. You know, I mean, the fun thing about working in the voting section is the fact that, you know, I get to go out and monitor elections, and you actually see that the work that you're doing day to day actually is affecting people out there. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of what I do is help monitor the language assistance, the Section 203, which says that basically it takes the census numbers that, you know, come out every 10 years, and if a county has 5% or more that speak a second language, they have to have their ballots and all their materials in that language. So, you know, so actually, you know, so we monitor that, and it's sort of interesting to see, you know, to go out there and you actually can talk to affected voters. You know, we can't do anything at that time, but we can monitor it and then get counties to ensure that they do bilingual ballots, have bilingual poll workers there to assist them with, you know, ballots, particularly like I was saying, like California, where you have all the initiatives. Okay, you need, you know, if a voter, you know, is like, you know, and I remember one year a friend of mine was staying with me, and she had her ballot, and you know, the California ballot was about this thick because it had pages and pages, and this was just in English, right? Pages and pages of initiatives, and you know, I could barely understand them in English. I don't know how how a recent immigrant would, you know, would understand it either. But yeah, so that, you know, so that's actually one of the fun aspects of my job is we actually can see hands-on that, oh wow, look, that poll worker's helping that person vote, you know, that kind of thing. Well, we utilize as many of the attorneys and professional staff in the Civil Rights Division as we can.
Okay.
It's like this November, we're sending out about 80 people, attorneys and professional staff. In 2014, I think we sent out almost double that number. So, yeah, not two things. One, if we have consent decrees, like with some of these ones with the language, you know, we've said, okay, you know, the county has agreed, oh yes, okay, we're not doing what we're supposed to do. So a consent decree will be written saying, okay, they agree to provide bilingual poll workers, provide bilingual ballots, et cetera, et cetera. And so we'll monitor that just to make sure they're doing that. Oftentimes what we'll hear from one of the other groups out, you know, either one of the Asian groups or whatever, saying, you know, we know that they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing in X, Y, or Z city or county. Can you check into it? And so, you know, our attorneys will sit there, they'll call the county or the city and say, oh, well, you know, are you doing bilingual ballots? Are you doing, and, you know, and so we'll sometimes monitor some of those as well. And then the other one, of course, you know, how the Voting Rights Act started was voting in the South. So often we're also there for elections with African American white contests. You know, no, it's ironic because one of the things I do in my spare time is I do a lot of community stuff. I'm on the Mayor's Commission on Asian Pacific Islander Affairs. You know, one of the things I actually do are special events. So all of the big dinners and stuff that happen in D.C. generally, I'm doing a lot of those as well. And